Amanda Lee is a Toronto-based registered dietitian, owner of Wellness Simplified, instructor at George Brown College, and a foodie at heart. Upon completing a culinary arts diploma, she knew she wanted to bring together her dietetic experience to create a nutrition coaching philosophy that is food-centric and grounded in teaching individuals a basic life skill, that being nourishing their body, mind, and soul. She has helped hundreds of individuals and families by encouraging, educating, and equipping them with the hands-on food skills to make healthy eating an easy choice. Amanda loves learning new skills and approaches and strives to provide the most up-to-date, evidence-based recommendations. She is currently pursuing a certificate in integrative and functional nutrition, and when she's not working with clients, students, or attending class herself, she can be found in the kitchen whipping up a new recipe or choreographing a new dance routine. Welcome, Amanda.
Awesome. Thank you, Sasha. I am super excited to be here today because we are doing my favorite thing in the world, which is cooking. The two recipes I'm going to be featuring today is a maple Dijon salmon sheet pan dinner, and then the second recipe is an amped up tuna salad. Now, for anyone sitting there being like, oh my gosh, I don't even like fish, so why are you making so much fish? Well, I am going to provide different substitutions, so don't worry, you can still use the same cooking technique as well as flavorings, but substitute the protein for one that you may enjoy more. But just a quick recap from last week, I did talk about 5 nutrients of concern when it comes to mental health and well-being for the senior population. And those were B vitamins, vitamin D, omega-3, fiber, and potassium. And in both recipes I'll be featuring today, we are going to be highlighting all 5 of those nutrients in each of the recipes, okay? So get ready. If you have your ingredients and you're going to be cooking alongside me, follow along because this is going to be quick, okay? So the first recipe we're going to work on is the maple Dijon salmon sheet pan dinner. The very first thing we need to do, however, is preheat our oven. So go ahead, turn your oven on bake 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm going to do that right now. All right, so now that the oven is preheating, we can get all our sheet pan ingredients ready. Let's start off with our vegetables. Now for the vegetables, you can use broccoli, you can use cauliflower, you can use zucchini, green beans, asparagus, whatever you may have on hand. Some of you might have broccoli at home. Great. I actually have cauliflower here today, and I also have a zucchini. So I'm going to show you exactly how we're going to prepare these vegetables. So we're going to first work on this cauliflower. So how are we going to prepare this cauliflower? If you have broccoli, great. Cauliflower cuts the exact same way. What we always want to do is when we're preparing our cauliflower or broccoli, try not to cut from the floret down. We actually want to cut from the stem down. The reason being is if we were to chop it off right from the top, you get all the snow is what I like to call it, or all these like little bits of white or green all over your chopping board. So instead, we can actually slice it down from the stem end, and then you can just tear your cauliflower or broccoli apart, and then you can continue going down from the stem end. We want them about bite-sized vegetables, like pieces, I should say. So that's perfect, okay? And then once you cut it, you can put it into a bowl. So let's chop it up like this. So again, any vegetable you may have on hand, you can use. The key is just cutting it about the same size so then they can bake evenly. Okay. I love this recipe because everything is done on one pan and then dinner is basically ready for you. If you want to add a starch to this recipe, you can actually cut up potatoes nice and tiny, or you can do sweet potatoes also nice and tiny. You want them tinier than the cauliflower just because they do take longer to cook. So by cutting it smaller, it will reduce the cooking time. Okay. So just go ahead, finish this off. And then I'm also going to add a zucchini just because I have it in my fridge and I feel like it would add some nice color. So I'll be using this today as well. But don't worry, if you only have one vegetable, that's totally fine. Carrots are also really, really nice in this recipe too if you want to cut it nice and thin. So with my zucchini, I'm cutting both ends off. And then I'm going to cut them into little moon pieces, I guess you can call them. Okay. And you might notice when I'm holding my knife, I always hold it on the actual blade and I wrap my hand around it. This way I get full control of the knife. Okay, not like this, where I see a lot of people holding it where their hand's so far away from the blade, but rather I'm actually gripping onto the actual blade of the knife. I always like to keep a bowl beside me to put all my vegetable scraps in. Okay, so let's clean up this board. All right, so now we have this beautiful bowl with our vegetables in it. I'm gonna go ahead now, we're gonna mix up the marinade for this recipe. The marinade today, we're gonna need some olive oil, we're gonna need some maple syrup, okay? We also need some garlic powder and oregano and apple cider vinegar. I'm also gonna add in my fish, I forgot to mention. I'm using Arctic char today. You can use wild salmon, you can use rainbow trout, but this is the wild fish I'm gonna be using today. I'm gonna put it right into the bowl, okay? Next, we're gonna drizzle on the olive oil. I'm just gonna eyeball everything today, but you do have the recipe, so you can follow along there. Next, I'm gonna add a touch of maple syrup, and then a splash of apple cider vinegar with the mother. We call it the mother because it's basically a natural fermentation in the bottom. And then we also need a nice dollop of mustard. You can use grainy or smooth. Okay. Last but not least, some black pepper and some salt. Okay. Now using your hands, best tool in the kitchen, in my opinion. You're just gonna, lightly massage everything. Don't wreck your fish though. Just kind of toss everything together. It smells so good already. Okay. Now in this recipe, you'll see the omega-3s are coming from this beautiful wild fish. We have potassium coming from the vegetables we added. We also have B vitamins coming from the fish. We also have vitamin D coming from the fish and tons of fiber from our veggies. So once everything is tossed, we can then put it onto our prepared tray. So my prepared tray, just give me 1 second, my hands are quite dirty. Grab my prepared tray that has the parchment paper lined on it. Okay. And then you can just make sure you evenly distribute all your vegetables and your fish. I don't like to cook a lot of fish at one time because it is tastiest the day you make it. Okay. There we go. So I'm going to stick this into my oven now at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you can also just set your timer for about 25 minutes. Okay. Our next recipe, let's go through the ingredients now. We need some chickpeas. Okay, you can use canned, just make sure you drain and rinse these canned chickpeas really, really, really well. Okay, and we're gonna add it to our bowl. The next ingredient is our tuna. Now for tuna, I think I already saw, someone had asked before whether or not we have to be worried about the mercury in tuna fish. Now, when it comes to canned tuna, you always wanna look for the word light. The reason being is the light refers to a smaller type of tuna fish. So the smaller the fish, the less likely you'll have as high amounts of mercury, okay? It doesn't mean that there's not gonna be any, but smaller amounts. So I always like to buy ones that are light, not solid. White is the other term, and that one refers to albacore tuna. So we actually don't want that. So we're gonna go add this to the bowl. Okay. And I just drained out all the water ahead of time. I thought I'd mention for the chickpeas, if you wanted to use just like freshly boiled ones, you can also do that. Okay, not a problem. Next, we're gonna chop up some vegetables and we're also gonna add some avocado in here as well. So I'm gonna show you what I have in my fridge. Okay, so in this little bundle I have here, I have some washed lettuce, which we'll be using as lettuce wraps for the tuna. And then last week, I bought a huge bunch of cilantro. So I'm actually gonna be using some in the salad today. Now, one of the benefits of cilantro and parsley is that they actually bind to heavy metals like mercury, which is why I love adding it to my tuna salad. So we just need a little bit of cilantro. Cilantro's quite strong, but in here, this is like a little surprise, right? I'm gonna also pull out a green onion. This is one of the best ways to store fresh herbs is I wash them first. I make sure my towel is slightly damp, and then I just roll it up. And both of these have been in my fridge for more than a week now. And they look like they're fresh. Okay, so a little trick there for you guys. So let's go ahead now and chop up these vegetables. So for the cilantro or parsley or dill for that matter, okay, change it up as you wish. We're gonna finely just mince these greens up. Now for cilantro, unlike parsley, you do wanna keep most of the stem because that's actually where most of the flavor is. Whereas for parsley, I usually just take off the leaf as the stem is quite woody. Okay, but cilantro, the stem is nice and tender. So you can just roughly chop cilantro like so, okay? If you don't have cilantro or parsley or dill, then you can omit it. That's not a problem. Next is our green onion. Oh my gosh, you guys, I just remembered. For my maple salmon, I forgot to add my garlic powder. And I also forgot to add my dried oregano. So if you guys do the recipe again, please make sure you add these two. I don't know why I totally forgot. Okay, next is my green onion. You're gonna chop it in half. And we're gonna use both the light green and the white part of the green onion and just finely chop them. If you don't want to use green onion, shallots work, red onion also works. Just something that will give the tuna salad some bite to it, okay? Right? And then you can add that right into your bowl. Next to this bowl, we're gonna be adding in our beautiful ingredient, our avocado. So the avocado, we're gonna carefully, oh, one thing I want to mention is my avocado, I have the stem still intact. You never want to remove the stem until you are ready to eat it, okay? So basically, don't touch the stem, leave it in there. What happens is when you remove the stem, this little hole in the avocado actually allows oxygen to seep through and it can actually rot easier, okay? So always buy avocados with the stem end still intact. Look at this green. Beautiful. So once you cut in half, the easiest way to get all the nice flesh of it is we're gonna cut it in half once more, and then we're gonna peel the avocado back. Okay. Now you see every bit of the flesh is completely removed from the avocado peel. And believe it or not, most of the vitamin E, which is a very potent antioxidant, for all my females out there, you know all those face creams we buy with vitamin E in it, right? Well, the vitamin E resides right on the outer part of the avocado. So that's why we want to make sure we have all of it. We don't want to waste any of it. And do the same with the second half. And these are kind of cute little tiny avocados. So I'm gonna use a full one. If you have a gigantic one, like maybe ones from Costco, you can use half of it instead, because those are pretty big avocados. Okay, and now I'm just gonna give them a rough chop. And then we're gonna add into the bowl as well. I'm starting to think I'm gonna need a bigger bowl. So right now, just give it a quick little smush. And then we're gonna be adding a few more ingredients to this amped up tuna salad. Okay. So to this, obviously, my avocado is probably gonna turn brown very soon if I don't add any ingredients in here, right? So to this bowl, I'm gonna add some mayo. If you don't have mayo, I'm actually using sour cream today, okay? Because I felt like using sour cream instead of mayo. But you can use mayo or sour cream in here. And then I'm also gonna add in a dollop of grainy mustard. I think grainy mustard is one of my favorite condiments in the fridge. I love it. It adds such a nice zing and a creaminess, so you don't have to use as much mayo. And then you can add some pickles. If not pickles, relish also works really well. So I'm gonna go ahead and add in a dollop of relish in here. Okay. And then some pepper. I'm not going to add any salt. I can always add salt later, but it's just because my tuna fish did have a little bit of sodium in it. This wasn't a salt-free one. So it does have salt in it, in which case that's why I'm not going to add any. I'll taste it and then we can see if we need to add any additional one. Okay. So now just mash everything together. The chickpeas should be somewhat mashed as well. The avocado adds to the creaminess of this whole entire dish. This one, and this is so filling because there's the chickpeas with all that fiber in there. We got some omega-3s from the fish. We got tons of fiber. Avocado is even higher and much higher in potassium compared to banana. So, and then we got B vitamins from the fish as well. And from a little bit from the mayo and sour cream, whichever one you're using works. So again, this dish has everything in it. And the bonus is you're gonna get a shoulder workout from smashing all these things too. My arms are getting tired. Okay. Oh, yum. Okay. Just mix that all really, really well. If you like it more chunky, that's fine too. Up to you. You can also, if you are going to keep it for a little bit longer in the fridge, what I would suggest is adding a tad bit of apple cider vinegar, just a tiny, tiny splash. But this will also just prevent the avocados from oxidizing or turning brown. Okay, so this way you can kind of keep it in the fridge for a longer time. Okay, so now that this is all mashed up, just for good measure, I always say, gotta taste it. Okay, so I'm just gonna take a little bit. Oh, it's perfect. I think it actually needs a little bit more black pepper. And maybe just a tiny, tiny, tiny sprinkle of sea salt. Okay. I'm gonna mash this up one more time. Okay. So now that this is done, I'm going to show you what we're going to do with the lettuce. So you can definitely use it as a sandwich, but I am just going to use lettuce wraps today and just stuff it in here. You kind of spread it around, and that way you can just use it as like a vessel. Like a taco almost. Okay. And I'll do one more. Now, if you didn't want to use tuna, you can use flaked chicken or even turkey. And salmon also works really, really well if you have any canned salmon. And then voila. And look at that. We legit just finished everything, I think in less than 15 minutes, right? We got our fish baking in there. We got our amped up tuna salad. We're gonna wait a bit because the fish is not done yet. I still have about 15 minutes on the fish and then we can take it out. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and answer any questions that you might have. So Sasha, do you want to go ahead and maybe read me off some of the questions while we're waiting for our fish dish?
Sure will. I'm just trying. There we go. Okay. First of all, let me speak on everybody's behalf. I'm sure everybody's feeling this way. I am so hungry right now and so inspired to make a really great, healthy lunch. So thank you very, very much. There were a lot of tips that came out of this, and I appreciate that you share little things like not removing the stem of the avocado. We're getting feedback on the chat, not having ever known that. And I think it's really important, and we really appreciate you sharing that, and how to store cilantro, because too often I'm sure we are throwing things away because they don't store in our fridge for as long as we'd like. And the unfortunate thing is that you have to buy sometimes larger bunches and it ends up half going to waste. So really appreciate that. All right. Well, we have a couple of great questions here for you, and I'm just doing them in the order in which we received them. First question is, do we need to worry about mercury in canned tuna? And I know you addressed that when you were chatting, but maybe if you could just add a little bit more detail to that, that would be great.
Sure. So definitely when it comes to canned tuna, I wouldn't worry about it if you're just eating it maybe twice a week or so. Any more, and maybe you should increase it by a little bit more variety when it comes to the type of fish you do purchase. But I would say twice a week with tuna and you are A-okay. And twice a week meaning like eating the full can. And even then, you are very, very much below the toxic levels of mercury. And then on top of it, if you go and use the tip about buying it as the light tuna, and then secondly, combining it with some parsley and cilantro, that would be even better. And now your levels of mercury would be much, much lower.
Much appreciated. Another question that came through is around substitutions. And
Yes.
So you were chatting a bit about substitutions. I liked that you used sour cream instead of mayo, but one of the questions is, can you substitute olive oil for the mayo? So some folks are maybe not wanting to use the mayo, and although the sour cream is a great substitute, what do you think and what are your thoughts about olive oil?
Yeah, no, for sure. If you didn't want to use the mayo or the sour cream, olive oil would be a great one. All we're trying to do is kind of moisten everything up anyways. So what I would suggest is if you are using olive oil, I would definitely add the splash of apple cider vinegar, because what mayo and sour cream also gives you is a little bit of acidity or a little bit of that kick, right? So if you're just using olive oil, it lacks that. So just add a splash of the apple cider vinegar and you are A-okay.
It's a great question too. Absolutely. Thank you for the feedback on that. We had some suggestions too. It's so great because everybody has their own recipes and their own things that they contribute or that they use to create their tuna salad. And I had to bring this up because I agree that I like this as a great idea. Viewers suggest adding chopped fermented veggies and chili flakes.
Yes, chili flakes in here would be so good. I agree. I also really like finely mincing celery oftentimes in here. But if you had like sauerkraut, you could also add that in. Pickled beets, you could add. I even sometimes chop up olives. Let me show you. These are my favorite olives. And for anyone who doesn't like olives, you gotta try these ones. These are the Castelvetrano. I can't even say it out loud, but they're an Italian one. But they're very fruity. So they're not as briny as the black olives, but I love these, especially in tuna salad. So I'll just kind of finely mince it and then add it in.
I'm going to interject it with the questions. I have a question for you, just because you're holding that up now. The brine from pickles or from olives, could we use that as a flavor in the tuna salad as well? Because it's immensely healthy and I think tasty. But what are your thoughts on that type of modification?
Yeah, for sure. You can, but just be aware, like the brine will also have, usually if it, depending on what you use, pickles will definitely have sugar in it. If it's just like a lacto fermented, say sauerkraut, like a naturally fermented one, then there's no sugar in it at all, right? But it will be high in salt. So just make sure you don't add an additional salt to the recipe.
Yeah, perfect. And a shout out to the pickle reference for all the pickle lovers out there. We were all, I'm sure, excited about, whoa, pickles, it's a great idea. So yes, for sure. Another question around substituting that just came up now is, can we use yogurt instead of the sour cream?
Yes, if you're using yogurt, purchase a Greek yogurt. So Greek or skyr, the Icelandic skyr, so it's a thicker type of yogurt if you're going to be using it for the tuna salad.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you. This, it's interesting because with technology, so much more information is available to us. And one of the questions that came up is obviously somebody who's done a lot of research around fish and food. And the question is there a safer farmed fish?
Ooh, farmed fish.
Yes.
I personally don't eat farmed fish very often. I mean, when I guess if I went out to eat, it's kind of it's going to be inevitable in that sense, right? Go to any sushi place, it's going to be a farmed salmon. I go to any pub or bistro, it's going to be usually a farmed fish as well. But when I personally buy fish, I try only buying wild caught fish. And yes, the fresh ones definitely can be way more expensive, but when you can buy wild frozen ones. Like even the ones I use today, they were frozen. But they are wild caught. So from an economical standpoint, but also from an availability standpoint, wild fish that are frozen is always available. Like you can always find it in the grocery store. So that's what I usually opt for.
Perfect. And just on that note, buying frozen wild fish, do you have a preference of where the fish comes from? Are we talking about Pacific? Do you have a preference? If you could just share some information on that.
I don't really have so much of a preference for that. I mean, if you can get like, Norwegian cod or anything like that, that'd be probably the best. But no, for me, I'm like, as long as it's wild, I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, folks, I'm going to encourage, if you have more questions, to please plug them in. I have a couple of things that I just would ask you to speak to. The salmon and the fish. I love the way you did it as a sheet meal. Leftover salmon. Tell us a little bit, or inspire us a little bit with what we can do, because many folks may just be cooking for one. And so to avoid having to cook every single day, if you were to make 2 pieces of salmon, and I agree, it's usually tastiest as you eat it, when you eat it just right out of the oven. But if you have leftovers, can you inspire or share a little bit around that?
For sure. So one thing I also want to note with the sheet pan dinner, if you didn't want to use a wild fish, you could use, say, a chicken thigh in there. Just do like a boneless one, so it cooks about in 25 minutes or so. Or you could also use extra firm tofu as another protein substitute if you're not a fan of fish. Okay. Now, when it comes to leftover fish, you could definitely transform it the next day into this amped up tuna salad, but using the fish instead. I also really like making fish cakes with them. So if you had leftover mashed potatoes or baked potato, you could just mash that in with the flaked, like the leftover fish, bind it with an egg, and then you could either just hand roast it lightly, or you can stick it in the oven and then make them into like salmon cakes, for example.
Oh, that's a great idea. Really great idea. And thank you as well for noting what we could use as alternatives if we're not fish lovers or seafood lovers. It's really great that you threw that in. So thank you. That was one of the questions. Just for those of you that are wondering about wild fish, there's just been a comment here. Thank you, Carol. She buys from Costco Alaskan wild coho or sockeye salmon. And I've tried them myself, and they are, for folks who like salmon, they're quite tasty. So thank you, Carol, for that. We do have a question from the audience that takes us back to a question we asked moments ago about why wild over farmed. So for folks that haven't read up on that, or perhaps don't understand the differences, do you mind shedding some information on that?
For sure. So when we say a fish is farmed, essentially it means, think of it as a gigantic fish tank, right? So it is very much monitored in that sense, but all the fish is growing in that huge fish tank where it's all netted around that area. And all the feed is also then predetermined what they're feeding the fish. However, similar to when you think about conventional chicken farming, right? They're very much cooped up in a very small amount of space. So with that being said, when it comes to the fish, what we're finding is those farm fish, a couple of things happens. Number one, they tend to be really, really high in fat, okay? But on top of that, where the fat is actually the area where we hold on to toxins. So things like mercury, PCBs in the ocean, like all the plastics that are in there, it gets stored within our fat tissue. So with farmed fish, because they're so much higher in fat, they also have a tendency to also carry a lot more of those harmful toxins in them. There's also, I don't want to scare you guys, but I also talked to one person who actually visited a fish farm before. And they were saying how on the scales of the fish, they could see that it was very, like, the skin wasn't beautiful. It was almost as if there was, like, I don't want to say toxins, but like diseased, like the skin, just because they're floating around in a lot of their own like feces, you can think of it that way, in that small confined area. So that's another reason why I'm not a huge fan of farmed fish. So the main reason though, I would say, is because they do tend to harbor more of those harmful toxins.
Wow, that
So
sounds a lot.
yeah, I want to add one thing. Like, let's just say, you know, the farm fish is the only thing that's available for you, right? It's not that you cannot eat them, but I would suggest if you are going to be eating fish that are farmed, that you stick to the lower fat fishes then. In which case, it could be like the sole, the basa, the haddock, right? Because they're so much lower in the fat, then if you are going to be eating farmed, they won't be as harmful because they're so low in fat. So because they're so low in fat, they won't be holding on to a lot of those harmful toxins either, because those toxins are usually fat soluble, meaning they're going to be held on within the fat tissue. Does that make sense?
Certainly does. And I really appreciate that you brought some education to that. I also wasn't aware of many of those factors, and I think that it's important to note. I have one last question for you. I'm not sure, unless you need to take the floor, that's fine.
Oh no, you didn't ask me. I'm going to take my fish out.
Okay. So given the time of COVID and attending or going to a grocery store daily is, you know, not necessarily in our best interest, can you provide us tips on some great foods that we should consider purchasing that would freeze well and take us through the week to help us eliminate the need for trying to go to the need of going to the grocery store frequently? And I realize that's kind of on the spot type question, but really anything you can share around that would really be, I think, a great resource to our audience.
So when it comes to, I'm going to open up the question a little bit even more broad, just in terms of how to basically stock your pantry so you do not have to go to the grocery store as often. Okay, so a couple of things come to mind. I'm just thinking about my own kitchen and what I have on hand. So I'm just going to turn off my oven. Okay, so firstly, let's start off with the freezer. So in my freezer, I always have at least one bag of frozen fruit. Okay, so right now I have frozen raspberries in my freezer. I also like to have at least one bag of frozen vegetables. Typically, I like having kale and cauliflower because I find that it's so versatile in my recipes. And then I also like to have some type of frozen protein present. So it could be frozen wild salmon, like someone had mentioned. They went to Costco and they bought a huge bag of like individually wrapped frozen salmon. Great. I may also have maybe even like a pork chop or steaks that I just wrap up individually, or I can vacuum seal them. And I have, 3 or 4 of those in my freezer. Ground meat also, I like to freeze that myself as well. So let's just say if someone likes to go to Costco, they buy 4-pack of turkey, right? The ground turkey, 1 pound, that's a lot to eat in one time, right? So instead, you can go ahead and freeze those. So there you go. In your freezer, you not only have fruits, you have vegetables, and you have proteins. Next, in my actual pantry, so in my cupboards, I always like to have some type of lentils, chickpeas, black beans, some type of legume, because that can also act as a really good protein source as well, right? Or even if you want to use canned beans, that's another one. Right. Canned fish, so the ones we talked about today, the tuna, the sardines. I have a little bit of, I think I have sardines and mackerel and tuna and salmon in my pantry as well, right? So again, lots of protein choices to choose from. What does this mean is that, one last thing, grains, right? So then you could have rice, you could have quinoa in there, you could have oatmeal, like those are very non-perishable. But what I just mentioned there, basically the only thing I would really need to go to the store for are things for fresh herbs, my fresh vegetables if I really needed it. But if not, I could always rely on my frozen vegetables. But I really hit on the most important groups of food that we need, which is our protein. I have, starches are very easy, like the rice and the barley and the quinoa, they will last a whole year in your pantry, right? So not a big deal. But then the biggest thing I think from a perishable standpoint is always our fruits and vegetables as well as our protein. But now you have an idea as to what you can do with the actual protein choices, especially if you're cooking for one, right? If you're cooking for one, it's way better if you can just wrap them up individually and just pull it out the day of. Let's just say in the morning time, I feel like a pork chop today. Let me just defrost a pork chop. Or I feel like a salmon today. Let me just defrost a salmon. And then maybe at lunchtime, you can just, open a can of fish and have that. or you can make 2 pieces at once, and then the next day for lunch, you can eat the leftover from the night before.
Yeah.
Was that helpful at all?
Yeah, that was really helpful. And I appreciate that you chose so many foods that are really full of nutrients that support mental health. So yeah, I think that was a fantastic description. Thank you very much. Now, just looking at the clock, we have about 12 minutes left. How are you doing on your end?
Good. I'm actually going to show you my final dish now here. So I just pulled this out. Okay, I don't know if you're gonna see it, but I'm gonna put a bowl and I'll show you guys in a second. So this is my tray. Ooh, it's so beautiful. So there we go. I don't even see it. We got our fish. You guys see it now?
That looks delicious. Absolutely delicious.
Perfect. Yeah, so this dish, you could always pair it. Again, I mentioned earlier, if you did want to add potatoes into this recipe, you could just cube them up very tiny and then add it in. Don't forget, like what I did today, I forgot to add my dried oregano and my garlic powder, okay? I think it's still going to taste great because it has mustard in it and maple syrup, so I don't know. I think I would be fine with it. Pepper flakes would also taste really good if you want a little bit spicy. A kick to this recipe as well. Alternatively, you could also just serve it with a little bit of, cooked quinoa or couscous, right? As a really simple side to go along with this recipe.
Wonderful. Well, you should know the comments are giving you an A+ for presentation, and you have now created a very hungry audience. I'm pretty sure I know what everybody's going to be doing when they're done here today. Amanda, on behalf of everybody here, you have just been a great person to connect with for 2 weeks in a row. The information has been so valuable. Your recipes are so simple, so healthy, and speak to exactly what we were trying to do, is bring awareness to foods that can really support our mental health. So I truly want to thank you very much for joining us. And I also want to announce that Amanda will be raffling off a 30-minute free nutritional consult. And so, yay! And so Amanda will choose the lucky winner from last week's audience and this week's audience, and we will notify the lucky recipient and exactly how he or she can connect with Amanda. Really, thank you so very much. It's just been very informative on so many different levels. And Amanda, as well, you may want to post on the thread, and maybe you did this last week and I'm going to ask you to do it again. Maybe just post some information if folks want to reach out to you, or if they want to watch some of your YouTube videos, because I'm definitely a fan and I subscribe, and I encourage many of you to follow, because you certainly have a lot of really great shows on YouTube. So thank you.
I'll add it in now.
All right, you do that now while I try to take back the screen for only another moment. If you want to learn more, or you have any questions about today or any upcoming sessions, or feedback, please reach out to your community relations manager, or reach out to us at www.vivalife.ca/mental health. Amanda, I will offer you another opportunity if you wanted to close up with anything else.
Yeah, before you eat, really take a few deep inhales and exhales. Bring your body to a state that it can optimize digestion and absorption. And remember, you're not just what you eat, you are what you absorb. So thank you again for tuning in, and I hope everyone has a safe rest of the day and week.